Hello and welcome everybody. Everybody is really, really welcome here to this event here this evening. I'd like to thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us tonight. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank you all for all of the time and effort that you put in the conversations that we had earlier this year. So we have a very, very busy schedule tonight with lots of interesting initiatives to be launched. And so if Colleen, will you just put up the program there, please? And I'll take people through it. Great. So my name is Justina Corcoran. I probably should have said that at the start. I'm a principal officer in the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications, and I have responsibility for citizen engagement and for the Climate Action Fund. So we're going to first hear from the Minister Eamon Ryan, and then we'll also hear from Minister Joe O'Brien from the Department of Rural and Community Development. After that, we'll have 3 short presentations from department staff and MCO in relation to the programmes that are being launched tonight. And then when we're finished those, we'll devote the rest of the evening to questions with the Minister. And we have a number of participants who took part in the consultation, and they have some questions that they would like to ask the Minister, and which he will then answer. We probably won't have time to get through everybody's answers or everybody's questions that come through the chat, but what we will do is we will answer those and we will publish them on our website over the next week or so. So I'm going to now just turn the time over to Minister Ryan, and he's going to just do the opening remarks. So thank you, Minister.
Good morning, Justina, and good morning, everyone. It's like good morning, it's good evening. It feels like it's been a long day, but I'm really glad to be able to join you today and to continue the good work we've been doing in terms of engaging, having dialogue, listening about what we need to do to make this leap we need to make to a low carbon future in Ireland. I'm here in Glasgow in the middle of the COP negotiation rooms. We're in the Irish government have a room as part of this, and we're centrally involved. There was a text produced today, I've seen it in the news, which I think forms the basis of negotiation. The next 2 or 3 days will be important to try and finalise and get agreement on that. And I heard someone say yesterday, which I think is true, this is a critical week. It's a critical week that may define this decade in how we make the leap we need to make to take the carbon out, to end the use of fossil fuels, to protect our planet, but also to enhance our natural world at home, to make our own environment richer, more stable, more resilient. Make this work, it has to belong to everyone. Every place matters. And we have to do it in a way where we're not just telling people what to do. We're not putting all the responsibility on the individuals easier. Such a huge challenge. It won't be done just by finger wagging at people or telling people what to do. We want to ask for help and get everyone involved and do so in a way that creates an outcome, as I said, that protects our local environment. We have to do this in a way that restores biodiversity, do it in a way that improves our health, that creates jobs, that works in a social justice way. It has to be a just transition. If it's to be a just transition, it has to be fast because the science is really compelling. We have to change. But if we're to do it fast, it also has to be just. Because if we're not supportive of it as a people, if we're not engaged, if we're not feel that it belongs to all of us, then it won't happen. We won't get buy-in, and we won't actually find the ways of actually doing this in a way that's better for us all. It's part of a process, in my mind, goes back to the Citizens' Assembly, where we started turning this around in our country, where we went 100 citizens randomly selected, who were put the real challenge that faced us, and they came back with really strong suggestions. The Oireachtas picked that up, and there's broad political agreement on the scale and nature of the change. That then led to this year, where we'll be developing our Climate Act and new climate plan. I think central to that was the engagement we had, the conversations, particularly through the spring. Some 3,800 people were involved, giving their views, and that was critical in shaping the Climate Action Plan, which we publish next week. We can't stop there. That engagement, that bottom-up, that community-led approach is the right way to go as we now deliver on the change we need to make. And so that's what this event tonight is about, to start sharing and plotting out how the next dialogue, our ongoing dialogue on this climate change is going to work, and to support it, how we can use our climate fund to help support community initiatives, to help create opportunities so that we come together, work together and think about how we make this change, how we communicate, how we educate ourselves, how we improve our skills, how we protect the local environment, as well as taking out the carbon and protecting the wider global environment. That's no small challenge, but that is what we have to do. And I think we as a country can do it well. We've shown that when it came to addressing the COVID crisis, that we're good at actually working together and actually changing dramatically what we're doing to protect our future. That was done primarily to protect, I suppose, an older generation who were most at risk. Now we need to do the same to protect our younger generation, to give them a stable, secure and prosperous future. So this evening, I'm looking forward to hearing the various presentations and then opening it up to dialogue, questions and answers, and listening and talking to each other. I'm very glad that I'm joined by my colleague, Joe Bryan, and because he has a central role in his ministry in terms of how we strengthen our community development, how we actually involve and engage and deepen the role of community organizations in actually making this change. So I'm going to hand over to Joe and then look forward to having the wider conversation in terms of what we need to do. Joe.
Thank you, Eamon. Gosh, I guess I'll start by perhaps just maybe outlining some of the areas that I have responsibility for, because and Eamon is right. I think in terms of the community and voluntary sector, there's a lot that we can do and there's a lot that we can support. But just I suppose maybe to channel some of the hope and sort of inspiration that a lot of us are feeling, especially coming out of the climate action plan, into some of the practical channels that we have at our hands, I think. So maybe just briefly, just to describe, first, I do have some quite relevant responsibilities in the Department of Social Protection in terms of oversight for something called the Roadmap for Social Inclusion. And this very much speaks to the need for a just transition. And during Social Inclusion Forum earlier this year as well, that whole dialogue around just transition came up quite a bit, which is one of the reasons I'm particularly eager to review the roadmap for social inclusion, because it needs to recognise that a lot more as well, and it needs to name it clearly, and it needs to name actions in terms of how we ensure, from a social protection point of view in particular, that we look after people. And we have started doing that, I would say, as well, in terms of the last two budgets in the social protection area. But really the bulk of the relevant activities in terms of my remit do land in the Department of Rural and Community Development. And I suppose it's relevant to point out there's two halves to the department. There's the rural affairs side and community development side. Community development side is more my half, but I will talk a little bit about rural affairs because there's quite a bit of relevance there as well, particularly in the context of our new rural development strategy, or rural future. Lots of good things in there that I just don't have time to touch on now, but we're running rural youth assemblies, rural ideas for as well, that will very much sync with what we're doing in the national dialogue. There's a number of programs on the rural affairs side of things that again sync very well with the climate action plan. Our outdoor recreation infrastructure scheme, we're going to be developing national policy in the area of outdoor recreation next year as well. There's a big push. Minister Humphreys is very keen in terms of remote working and pushing that. And we are developing a national integrated network of 400 plus remote working hubs. That's going to be key, I think, for invigorating rural Ireland, but in terms of the whole decarbonisation process as well. That's going to be really very important. Rural Regeneration Development Fund and the Leader Fund, they're big funds that are increasingly playing a key role in terms of climate action as well. And something that we've got a particular interest in Green Party as well is the Town Centre First policy, and we'll have some detail coming out on this before the end of the year. Our department co-chairs that, and we got some significant funding in the budget as well to secure town regeneration officers. And this is very much bringing life back into towns, bringing the core back into towns that have been hollowed out by expansion to the edges, which obviously requires more transport, and it's about more vibrant town centre living. So I just wanted to give a nod to some of the rural affairs side of things. There's quite a lot happening in that area. But in terms of the community development side, and more directly speaking about the community and voluntary sector, I think it's important to point out that our sort of key strategy in this regard. It's called Sustainable, Inclusive, Empowered Communities. It's the agreed government strategy between the community voluntary sector and government. Agreed back in 2019, but one of the 11 objectives had actually some very good foresight in it. And it's worth reading out. It says, basically, we commit to supporting community development and local development to engage with climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies. So that's locked in there, and that we've been building up in capacity and doing that over recent years. But I think this fund tonight will give us more capacity in that regard. PPNs are also under my area, and I think in terms of the bottom-up approach, they are one of the key players that we will be calling upon, but also supporting as well. And we're in the process of concluding a review of PPNs to see how we as a department can better support them as well. So there's 16,000 members nationally as well. And I think from my point of view, it was very important that the role of PPNs was recognised in legislation, and it's there in the Climate Act as well, that PPNs have to be consulted in the development of local action plans by local authorities. This is going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I think it's important that people see that we do have structures there that can translate our aspirations and the funding into real action on the ground. People in the sector will know that I'm a big advocate of the Social Inclusion Community Activation Programme that's implemented by our local development companies. Again, a key role to be played here, I think, in the whole area of just transition. And some of our local development companies really are leading the way in this regard. We have North East and West Kerry Development Company, and I think their Smart Villages project in Dingle deserves a mention. And it's something that I think that can be replicated across local development company areas across the country. Also key, I think, going forward will be our volunteering infrastructure. Due to our success in securing funding in last year's budget, we now have a situation where we have a volunteering centre in every local authority area. And this is also backed up by our first national volunteering policy, which we launched last year. And we're in the process of developing lots of really good support structures, procedures and practices as well. But again, the local volunteer centres are leading in this regard. I was at Louth Volunteer Centre yesterday, and it's really exceptional to see how they are not just supporting the individual volunteers themselves, but also the organisations engaging with volunteers. So the quality and what people are getting out of volunteering is going up every day, but also what organisations are getting out of it as well. And there's a particular climate action, I suppose, relevance to what we're doing with volunteering, because last month we launched the Community Volunteers Programme. So this is essentially a volunteer reserve, whereby 10 local authorities, initially 10, and there'll be more coming on next year, are going to pre-train volunteers to be able to react to local and national emergencies. They did so during the pandemic, but we're going to prepare them now as well to be able to react at the press of a button to climate emergencies and weather emergencies, but also regular community events where they can be involved in as well. I do also want to give a nod to the new community development programme that we launched this year as well. And if we're talking about grassroots bottom-up approaches, this is very much where it needs to be. We've started a process of I suppose, re-resourcing that whole approach, and I'm very eager to build that over time as well. I do want to say something about our community services programme, because it does have some relevance as well. I think the whole area of social enterprise, particularly in the area of the circular economy, is going to be very, very important. And I like it in particular because it brings in the whole green side of things, but also the whole area of social inclusion as well. And there's a particular relevance that there's some traveller groups in particular that are really leading the way in this regard. And I want to give a nod to Bounce Back Recycling in Galway as well, who a lot of groups I think should look at the work that they're doing in terms of the whole circular economy side of things. Later in the year, and there's not much left in the year, but it'll be next month, we will be starting the whole process of developing a national philanthropy policy. And I certainly know from my work in the sector previously to getting elected, philanthropy played quite a huge role in driving social change and supporting social change. And there are very clear signs from philanthropy organisations in the country at the moment that philanthropy wants to play a key role in the transition to a carbon neutral economy as well. So there's big opportunities coming up there as well. I guess I'll conclude soon, but I mean, I would say I've been out and about, thankfully, over the last couple of months since restrictions have eased. And it really has struck me that there's huge energy on the ground in communities. There's huge eagerness and talent for people to improve their communities. I would say there's a bit of work done to bring people around to the actions that need to happen on the climate side of things. A lot of communities are working very much on core social issues, but there is an openness there and an eagerness there to work on the whole area of climate action and just transition in particular as well. So I think there's huge potential. We have a lot of the support structures, we have a lot of the policies. I think the funds that we're talking about tonight will go a long way to do it. And as I'm saying that, it is fair to say that a lot of groups on the ground are leading the way as well. On Monday, I visited Dunleer Sustainable Energy Communities, and that's really an example, probably the best example in the country, of how a community is coming together to really transform their village. And I'm not sure how close they are to carbon neutral, but they're a long way to getting there anyway. That's a very impressive project. And then on a whole other end of the scale, the Red Door project in Drogheda as well. It's working with people with addiction problems, but they're bringing in new biodiversity projects and developing new biodiversity projects as part of supporting people with addiction and helping them to, I suppose, chart a pathway out of it. And I think it's fair to say as well that in across the country, and I'm finishing, I'm getting nods to finish, I'm almost there. On Friday, we're announcing the annual awards for Tidy Towns winners. And there's lots of preconceptions about what tidy towns do, but really in terms of the front line of enhancing biodiversity and very localized climate action projects, they're very much at the forefront. I'll stop. We've got a very vibrant community and voluntary sector, and I think this fund will go a long way to supporting them to initiate the action that we need. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Minister O'Brien, and it's great to see that there's so much happening in the community. And I know this department, we dipped our toe into the community this year for the conversations with the PPNs, and we hope to broaden that and bring a lot more people into to future conversations and build on that community piece. Minister, I know just one of the things, back to, sorry, Minister Ryan, just in relation to one of the things that we're hoping to announce here this evening, and I know I'm going to turn the time over to our three presenters who are going to give an update on the community conversations, or sorry, the climate conversations report, and that's the feedback that we received from you as part of that process, where we've collated it all together and we've shared it with all of the policy makers and pen holders to make sure that it was incorporated into the climate action plan. And also another key piece of that is that it really informed the two other pieces that we're going to launch tonight. One of them is around the new structure for the National Dialogue on Climate Action, and the other one the Minister O'Brien has mentioned a few times. But Minister, before we go into those, Minister Ryan, do you want to just maybe say a few words about the Climate Community Action Programme and you know, just kind of what that's about?
Very briefly, it's a fund we're using from the Climate Fund, some 60 million euros over the next 3 years, divided in two 18-month periods. I describe it as a call because we're looking for people to involve in a program of activities and a whole range of different ways in which communities can use that funding, can apply for funding and use it to support action on the ground. And as said, it's quite wide and quite open in terms of the creative ways that can be used to get communities engaged, to deliver real change, to make it happen. And a variety of different organizations, Hubble, I think, having a real role in terms of helping support some of the voluntary sector. I think it should also help support some of the education and dialogue and communications. It isn't all about just physical benefits and developments in the area. I think we have to look at this as a fund to help leverage more dialogue and more change in terms of how we organize together to make this happen. So that's an important part of tonight's work. The program itself will be, I think, hugely significant as a catalyst for change. And when we learn from examples what really works, then we replicate around the country. So it's an innovative test of different initiatives. And I think what will allow us to do is monitor and measure those that are really taking off and then share them around the country. That's how I see it working.
Great, thank you very much, Minister. Okay, so now I'm going to turn the time over to Colleen, who will talk to you on the Climate Conversations report, and she'll be followed then by Rob Mooney, who will take you through the new dialogue structure, and then Caroline will talk to you a little bit more about the the Community Climate Action Programme and some of the detail on that. So Colleen.
That's great, thank you. Just trying to get to this to move. Apologies. So I'm just going to try again. Apologies, I'm not sure why that's not sharing. So I'm going to present the findings of a national consultation that I know most people here today participated in. And I can see there's lots of great suggestions coming up in the chat box that were included in the report and that we have put in the full report. So I'm going to give a very much a whistle-stop tour of some of the key findings, but I wanted to share how we undertook this process. This was called the Climate Conversations. It was part of the National Dialogue on Climate Action, and this was to inform the 2021 Climate Action Plan. So we had, as Minister Ryan said at the outset, we had just individual contributions, 3,800 contributors. I see quite a few of those people are here tonight and sharing some of their ideas. We had, as Minister O'Brien said, excellent participation from the PPN network, not only the PPN organisations that deal with environment, but also those that were dealing with social justice and cultural issues within their community, including a lot of Tidy Town volunteers as well. We had a huge participation from young people, both in terms of individual contributions, but also we had 12 Corlean and Ogue groups, and we had 1 in-depth groups. And this was the largest, I think one of the largest, if not the largest consultation on the environment in Ireland in terms of participation. So it was excellent. We had people from every county, from every age group, and we had a mix of people who are directly involved in the environment by being members of groups and those who just wanted to participate and have their voice heard. So what were the people saying? There was a real consistency, different suggestions of how this could be achieved, but there was a real appetite to act now. 92% of those who participated felt that this was a very serious issue, and that's in line with information that we're seeing from the EU barometer as well. People are taking, we asked people what action they were taking or wanted to take. People are already taking a lot of action across many fronts, but they're planning to take more action. And they also want to take more, but are not able to. And they point out that they'd like to do more, but there are system issues in their way that are preventing them. So unsurprisingly, they want to see real system change. And 85% of people want bigger ambition from government in the action that's being taken about climate. This is very much around the areas of infrastructure and services, around funding and finance, around information, but also around changes in regulation and looking at how we incentivise different sectors of the economy. What was interesting is we posed this very much around climate action, but people very much see biodiversity and climate change as being completely interconnected. On one hand, we know that the natural environment is going to be part of the solution for climate change. And on the other hand, people are seeing the impact of climate change on the environment around them and the real need for serious mitigation efforts to be made. Above all, and this was really what struck myself and my colleagues Ruth and Simon when we were analysing this, is that it's about bringing everybody along on the journey. Over and over again, we heard it has to include everybody, both those who've been directly impacted by moving to new ways of generating energy, but also those who might not be able to afford to take the steps that are needed to reach the new, more climate-friendly environment. So this sense of including everybody was from everybody. So even from those who maybe could afford it or whatever, it was like, this is only going to work if we include everybody. And once again, very much the youth were sharing that they wanted to be really included in this. And how to include people really welcomed this as a consultation. So we got some really nice feedback about this as a process, but there was a real sense of we've done this before, but we want to see how you're acting on what we're telling you. The two key areas where people are taking action, but feeling that they'd like to take more, but are prevented from doing that, were in travel and energy. So in travel, people want to be more active in how they travel, walking and cycling, but they really feel that there's a lack of safer and available or accessible ways for active travel. And that was both in the urban and in the rural areas. And I'd just like to say we did do an analysis on this to see where there were big differences between rural and kind of urban thinking. There wasn't. A lot of these views kind of were quite uniform, not uniform, but there was a real eagerness to take action on both sides. Obviously, in terms of travel, this was one area where rural people felt that they would like to take more action, but couldn't because of systems issues at the moment. Definitely better public transport links were something that people wanted, but they could see there had been a lot of progress in this area. What was lacking now was maybe an interconnectivity, so better investment in the linkages that are available. And also public transport in rural areas was seen as being a real challenge. So another area that was related was stronger planning. So let's travel less. Let's look at 15-minute cities. Let's look at better planning and spatial planning so that our towns are kind of not sort of so car dependent as they have been. There was a lot of discussion, particularly in the focus groups that we had around better community travel initiatives. So the idea of, certain things like how kids are getting to school, some great initiatives already taking place. How can we encourage these, share these? And also within the rural sector, there was a real appetite for finding better ways to come up with community solutions on transport. And one other area I'd like to mention is we had a strong submission from the youth sector around affordability of public transport. And I think that was something we really felt was worth mentioning. Electric vehicles were mentioned. The fact that they're last on that list slightly indicates that they were mentioned, but they weren't top of mind necessarily. Those other issues were the things that we got the strongest response to. So people do want to look at electric vehicles. Affordability is a big issue here, and infrastructure. And then we came to people's homes. We had a mix of homeowners and renters who gave us feedback here. People are really keen to improve the fabric of their homes because it's warmer, it's cheaper to heat, but there's a real barrier around affordability to this, but also knowledge on how to go about this, that is quite complicated to do this, and how they can trust in that process. We also had some feedback from people involved in the building sector who are involved in that about the materials that were being used. This is going to be one of the biggest kind of transformation projects of homes. Are we really thinking about the way that we're doing it? Are we being as innovative as we could be in how we do this? A very strong around energy, and particularly the move to renewables. There was really strong enthusiasm at the local levels where we spoke to the PPN groups. They see this as being a real opportunity to encourage new employment opportunities, new wealth generation amongst communities. So they want to be involved in how the new energy is generated. Microgeneration was another area, lots of enthusiasm, but potentially a lot of barriers for people being able to do microgeneration, either from the facilities that they live in or from the affordability. And this was one area where we got quite a bit back, both in retrofitting and in microgeneration from renters who felt that they are being a little bit excluded from being able to join this discussion, and they would like the opportunity to do so. An overall very positive response to moving towards a more sustainable grid. But again, this issue of, while it's important to move at pace, you have to include people. So this was the one area where we got some pushback on pace. So it was this sense of don't go so fast that you're not consulting to people about it. This idea of there's a danger of communities not being actually involved as we move towards that, and planning as well. Two areas where people are taking the most action at the moment and feel, it's possible for them to take even more action was around food and food waste, and shopping and recycling and reuse. So one area that they felt it would really benefit from is to make lower carbon food options more affordable, and also to give people more information and education on how to move or to how to include more low carbon food in their diet. Community growing came out really strongly in this area as something that people would like more support to do, more resources in terms of training, but also making more public land available to do that. And supporting local came out really strongly in this area. And that's local growers and local markets were something that people felt were really under pressure for a number of reasons, because of the kind of the pricing situation, the kind of subsidies that are available to sort of grow at a larger scale and for larger growers. And there was a sense that local producers need more support. The other thing that's really worth noting is there was there was a very strong support for farmers, but like in terms of helping farmers to make this transition to a more sustainable approach. And there was a recognition that there's barriers in the way that need to be addressed to help farmers to almost incentivize farmers to go to a more sustainable approach. And then really important, while people are making good efforts and felt that they're making a lot of effort on food waste, there was a sense that there could be still more to be done in terms of understanding how to prevent food waste, and also in terms of how composting, to allow for larger composting facilities. In terms of shopping, this is the place that people really felt they were doing the most at the moment and were taking the most action. There's a real appetite to find more sustainable products, but there's a sense that the market isn't being incentivized to create, there's sustainable products are more expensive, that labeling isn't clear, that it's not easy to shop sustainably, and they would like to have better options and better information about sustainable products. There was during the community conversations, I think myself and my colleagues felt it was a real privilege to join into those, to hear the amazing initiatives that are going on at a community level around the sort of circular economy. We're seeing sort of men's sheds, we're seeing repair cafes. These are then linked to local shops. So already this idea of kind of creating sort of circular economies at a local level is taking place. And the communities that are doing this see this as a real opportunity to revitalise their town centres and to get the community involved. So a real sense that this is something positive, but that this needs more support in terms of space available for it, training, regulation around insurance, and funding as well. Recycling is something that people are doing a lot of, but they need more accessible recycling was one thing that came up. And while plastics was very top of mind, the ban on plastics was very welcomed, but there was also a sense that hard to recycle products should be called out and should be absolutely banned as well. So to extend beyond plastic and look at what other packaging materials could be reduced or eliminated. Kind of conscious of the time, so I'm just going to say we had great local community activist involvement, and they would really welcome capacity building and increased funding. They would also really like to see their role recognised and to be consulted, and also for some of their initiatives to be shared both with local authorities and across different authorities. They are very connected to the land, and they would like to see a much better land use strategy in place, better resources for the people who have to enforce those strategies, like the National Park and Wildlife Services. In certain areas, very strong interest in understanding what the plan is around mitigation, particularly around flooding and coastal erosion. So people want to know what's in place for that, and that to be shared and be more clearly articulated to them. So overall, there was a lot of people wanting to take action, more action. People feel frustrated that they can't take the action they'd like to do. So they'd like to see it being made easier through infrastructure and services, being encouraged and incentivized through finance. They'd like this has been a great process. They'd like to see that continue on, this engagement to be a very active and constructive engagement, support a better supply of sustainable goods, and above all, educate and inform. So that's a whistle-stop tour of thousands of comments and feedback we got. You can check out the conversation. We'll put the link into the chat box now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Colleen.
I'm just going to hand over to Rob now. Sorry.
Thanks. That's good. Could you go on to the next slide if you don't mind? Thank you. So I think, as we can see from the presentation on the climate conversations, there's been a huge enthusiasm by the public. It really articulated a voice of the public who are responsive. They feel a sense of urgency around climate action. There's an enthusiasm to work with government, with agencies, to make changes. They also feel that there's a lack of information in certain areas. They're making changes where they can, but there is a lack of information or knowledge, resources, or capacity to do so in certain areas. These climate conversations have allowed us to articulate or identify where some of those key challenges lie. And you've heard from Minister O'Brien as well, and from Colleen, that there is significant work already happening at that local level. And that one of our jobs is to try and really understand and to get to grips with exactly what's happening at that local level and harness some of that work. So the government, or what we've been asked to do as government, is for joined up thinking, to be ambitious in our policies and for people to see them reflected where they live. So it's clear that the government and the public sector have to lead by example. But delivering on this ambition is the responsibility of everyone in society, and that really is the fundamental goal of the national dialogue. I see we're having some technical issues. That's great. Perfect. Thank you. So following from the climate conversations and some other significant inputs, we've now developed a new national dialogue on climate action. So this was piloted back in 2017 to 2019, but following a lot of sort of really excellent work done through the climate conversations, but also the new climate action plan, the Climate Action Act, etc., building on this huge momentum. We're now launching this new dialogue that's going to be fundamental to engaging with communities across Ireland and also delivering at a national level. So the NDCA is fundamentally going to engage with stakeholders and the public on climate action, as I said, at that local and national level. The core goal is to empower everyone in society, and empower is a very important word to us. So we recognize a lot of work that's being done. We're finding the best way to engage, understand what's happening already, and empower people to deliver that more effectively. And that's our core role. We have three key ways that we're going to deliver this. The first is improving climate literacy. And climate literacy doesn't specifically just talk about awareness. We know awareness is very high. We know there's a lot of really significant interest and eagerness to engage in climate action. It's about enabling people to understand what they can do, how they go about doing it. The second piece is then to ensure that we identify where those barriers exist. So then to support people and enable people to engage and deliver on changes they want to make for themselves at that local level and roll it up onto a national level. Further to that, we're going to be capturing insights from all these engagement activities, which I'll run through in a moment. And we're going to also be doing significant research in this as well, which I'll talk about in a second as well. And the purpose of that third piece is to review what we're doing, to understand if it's effective, if we're having an impact, and if it's not working as effectively as possible. This is an iterative process, much like the Climate Action Plan itself. The NDCA will be reviewed every year, which I'll talk about in a moment. Next slide, please. Thanks, Colleen. So to give you a flavor of some of the work that we're going to be launching, and this is, some of it we started already and we'll be launching early in the new year. There'll be a national climate stakeholder forum, and that will provide the opportunity for significant discussion, analysis and review of policy and decision making at a fairly high level. There'll also be the establishment of a youth climate assembly. So this is a very big ask, a very prominent sort of request that came through, especially from that youth voice, and something that we're very happy to work with our colleagues and the establishment of in Q1 2022. And that is going to see us inviting the youth from Ireland, from some of our colleagues in Corleone and Yogue and some of these other groups to participate in these serious discussions around climate to capture that voice. Also, members of the Youth Climate Assembly will have a seat on the National Climate Stakeholder Forum as well to ensure that we're linking those things effectively. We're going to be hosting these climate conversations annually. They're going to be a core tool and mechanism for us to feed the voice of the public, i.e. to deliver public participation back into our climate action plan as our core policy on an annual basis. And we're also going to be hosting a series of climate conferences, lectures and workshops that will bring other stakeholders, the academic community, researchers into this discussion to ensure that we're bringing the latest thinking at that level into our consideration. Next slide, please. At the local level, we're going to be promoting local climate conversations. That includes working with existing groups, PPNs, but also local authorities who are developing their own climate action plans. We're going to be working with all of these community organizations and our CAROs to ensure that these climate conversations are enacted at that local level. We're going to be supporting network and capacity building between organizations. Some of that is through dialogue and engagement, and some of it we'll talk about in a moment through the Climate Action Fund. We're also going to be hosting on an annual basis a national climate conversation on local action. And what that's going to do is invite local actors, community organizations, groups, PPNs, etc., to come together in a big national forum once a year to discuss, to present best practice, discuss their opinions, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And going back to Minister Ryan's point, how can we scale? How can we use those great ideas? How can we harness those ideas and scale them up and help deliver those across the rest of the country? Next slide, please. The evidence base that we're going to deliver will help us identify people most impacted by the transition. So whilst we're doing climate conversations, we're reaching out to the public, we're reaching out to people to engage with us, to engage in that discourse. We also recognize that some people won't contribute through these traditional mechanisms. What we're going to do is, working with the EPA, we're doing a series of nationally representative studies to ensure that we capture the voice of a representative sample of the population across all demographics. This will allow us to identify people who are at risk for a variety of different reasons. It'll allow us to inform the climate action plan and sectoral policies, and then fundamentally target policies, supports, and engagement activities that meet the needs of those specific populations. We recognize that a big, large study won't necessarily capture everybody in the right way. So that study will also be used to identify gaps and specific challenges for specific communities. And we will work with them to do further research to ensure that everybody is as involved as possible. This will allow us to transition in a way that is just, equitable, and fair, and accessible for everybody. So we can identify these challenges and make sure that people can access and engage with climate action. Next slide, please, Colleen. And then just to finish on this, this is an annual program. The Climate Action Plan is the core of what we're going to be taking our policy remit from. We'll be running these climate literacy programs through education, through communication. So climate literacy will be built into our national curricula, and also will have strategic communications on climate action being rolled out across the country. I've discussed the engagement activities. They'll be rolled out in parallel at the local and national level. The research will be built out across the national level. The research and evidence work will also be running in parallel to measure the impact of what we're doing. We'll be monitoring this on an outcome basis. So looking at, are we actually improving climate literacy? Are we actually empowering people to act? Are we actually measuring the impacts we should be measuring? On an annual basis, we'll then be synthesizing the outputs of all these activities and providing an annual report that will feed back into the Climate Action Plan and sectoral policies to ensure that people understand where the view of the public, the challenges are, and how, again, we target those policies effectively. So thank you. I'll hand you over to my colleague, Caroline. You're on mute, Caroline.
That's not a good start. I'm going to take you through a very quick run through of the Community Climate Action Programme that the Minister referred to there a little while ago. I'm just going to explain what the strands are, who can apply for it, and when you can apply for it. Next slide. So basically, we're providing €60 million from the Climate Action Fund for community climate action. The objective of the programme is to support and empower communities to shape and build low carbon communities. So we're going to run the programme over 3 years. So I put 2022 there, but it'll be really from now until 2025, and some of the projects will probably go on beyond that. We're going to look at 2 phases, and it's going to apply to all communities, whether they're small, large, urban or rural. So we're going to do a combination of partnerships between communities and local authorities, and also to do an open call. So as the Minister mentioned, there'll be two 18-month phases. In phase 1, we're providing €30 million, and we're going to provide that across 2 strands. So the first strand is going to be on action in the communities and projects in the communities. And the second one then is going to be about building capacity of communities to develop and roll out those projects. So we will be addressing, the programme will run across the same themes as applied to the climate conversations, and they're just listed there again, and Colleen went into detail on those. So the first strand then is about building low carbon communities across the 5 themes. And we're providing €24 million to the local authorities to develop partnerships between the communities and the local authorities. And we would also envisage a key role for the local community development groups, such as the PPMs. Each local authority will have a budget for its operational area, and we've
we're putting in place 3 different tiers of funding, just to encourage sort of the smaller communities maybe that are dipping their toe in, or if they want to be more a bit ambitious, there's medium projects and larger projects. Next slide. So it's going to be open to all communities to apply. The local authorities will invite expressions of interest, and the expressions of interest will be evaluated against set of criteria so that it is a transparent process. We're aiming to roll it out in the first quarter of 2022. We're just finalising the finer details. So the type of projects that we're talking about, these are just some ideas just for just inspiration, I suppose, but you know, community EV projects, energy efficiency. We're very interested in nature-based solutions, so maybe there could be community biodiversity gardens. We're interested in repair hubs, and I think one of the interesting items that came out of Climate Conversations was the library of things. So not everybody needs to buy the lawnmower or whatever, and that a community can have a store of these kind of items. Then strand 2 is all about climate education, capacity building and learning by doing. And what we want to do is just to build that capacity within communities to run their own projects going forward. This will be an open call by Pobl, and part of the Pobl involvement will just ensure that there's inclusivity and collaboration, and that we will be trying to leave nobody behind. So €5 million is going to be available for that. And there will be 2 tiers in that, small projects and large projects. So the type of things that we're interested there are maybe mentoring for communities, know-how guides, demonstration projects, that type of thing. So for strand 2, we're aiming this at the not-for-profit organisations, the NGOs, community, voluntary, charitable organisations, social enterprises. And this strand is opening up on Monday. So Pobl's portal will open on Monday, and it'll close for applications then in the middle of January. So I think that's...
We'll just stop in there, Carolyn, just to allow time for questions.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much.
Unmute, Justina.
Sorry, thanks for the presentations, and a lot of more detail. There's probably more questions people have than answers, you know, at this stage. So a lot of that detail will follow. So now what I'd like to do is turn the time over to the Minister and some of the participants that took part in the conversations earlier on this year, and they have a number of questions which are around the themes that we explored through the climate conversations. And so maybe I might just maybe ask Cian, would you like to ask the Minister a question?
Absolutely, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. So good evening, Minister. I want to ask a question with regards to fibre crops and their potential in helping Ireland combat climate change in agriculture. In the programme for government, it was stated that the potential for growing fibre crops such as hemp will be fully explored. I was wondering if the government had considered including the promotion of hemp production in the Climate Action Plan, considering its potential as a carbon sequester, a raw material for environmentally friendly products, as well as its economic potential to create thousands of jobs in the rural economy, as according to Teagasc. And if so, why is it not included in the plan?
Well, firstly, the plan isn't restrictive. It will keep changing and evolving. Just on this, there's one project I think the Department of Agriculture are actually doing a big diversification study, how to look at new crops, new streams, and I absolutely agree with you. I think fibre-based crops for use in building materials, for use in a whole range of different, is huge potential. I'm going back now, I remember it was Marcus McCabe years ago. I remember visiting him up in County Monaghan where he was already doing that, growing hemp, and it has huge properties for insulation and other uses. And I think that's the example when Justina said, you know, we need creativity now. We need to think differently and do things differently. And particularly around use of materials, develop the circular economy and putting building materials, particularly, I think, just to follow that example, into good use. So I agree with you. I think there's real potential. I think one of the other last things I'd mention is we need to plan our land, like manage it in a way that optimizes climate for sure, but also for nature, but also for farming to give, as I said, diverse incomes. And I think that's the particular strength of some of that sort of development, is that it gives opportunities for farmers. And so I think that's just the example of the sort of changes we do need to make. And it's in farming, it's in our buildings, and often they can go together.
Thank you, Minister.
Thanks, Cian. Thanks, Minister. So, okay, maybe we turn over to Charles. Would you like to ask your question to the Minister, please?
Good evening, Minister. The Fingal PPN climate conversation identified the urgent need for individual older housing to be retrofitted to improve energy efficiency, but many of them are occupied by people who don't have the financial means to do so. Could the government examine the possibility of providing 100% loans for retrofitting houses, perhaps on a means-tested basis, but on a similar basis to the Fair Deal scheme for nursing home care? So the loan will be repaid after the death of the owner or when the property is sold or transferred. So it wouldn't be a grant, it would be a loan which would be repayable in the future.
Thank you, Charles. I think that's a very good idea. I think it can build on what is already happening. For a lot of people on low incomes, they're the ones we're targeting first on with regard to retrofitting. The Warmer Home Scheme we have, which is 100% supported, funded, covers a lot of those houses. About 109 million euros we'll spend next year targeting in that exact area. There'll be a lot of further developments even in the next few months. We're starting a new national retrofitting scheme in January, and the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland will be centrally involved. And it has to make it easier for people to make the change. Now, whether that's through a mortgage type model or the Fair Deal type system you've cited, or whether it's one of the things we're also looking at is really low cost loans to de-risk the loan by the first section of the loan being guaranteed by the state. So the risk of not getting paid is dramatically reduced. The benefit of that, it brings down the cost of loan and cost of the overall project to make it work. So we are looking at that sort of innovation. We may go further, and I think your proposal is a very specific one in terms of that's a Fair Deal type scheme for someone who mightn't want to take out a long-term loan. So yes, I think is the answer. We need to start looking at those sort of examples. But first things first, we need to spend that 109 million in the warmer homes, develop the new low-cost loan scheme, and the one-stop shop, which is already starting now, often involving local communities, to actually make it easier, because this is complicated. And a lot of people are nervous. They don't have the engineering or what exactly is the right thing to do. So first things first, I think, is that advice to people, young and old, to how to make the switch. And I think as we evolve with them, that sort of proposal you have is quite a good. I haven't heard of that previously. So we look at that and certainly consider it as part of the suite of different measures we need to do to we have to deliver 500,000 retrofit houses this decade. And I think your idea is a very good one that we might well look and add to the mix. It's an example of listening and maybe picking up what is a very practical proposal.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Thank Minister. Helen, would you like to ask her a question? You're on mute, Helen.
Okay, hello, how are you? Thank you, Minister and panelist. Yes, I have a question, and it's very general and broad, and you may not be able to give me a very specific answer, but I think it's something we all need to look at. How can we curtail globalization and its destruction on local and rural communities and create localized circular economies that can use its own resources and be educated about its own resources to address the needs of those local communities? Can we get some type of structure that from the bottom up that can actually put this in place and curtail the glass ceilings that we all meet when we try to work from the bottom up? Thank you, Minister.
It's a very good question. It's the heart of the matter, because it's just ever increasing longer supply chains, which are often very vulnerable now. We're seeing, you know, the ability to get things from the other side of the world, if the supply chain is disrupted, becomes really difficult. So it makes sense for us to rely more on local. And also what we're doing in the waste part, we have a waste action plan, 200 actions in it. And a lot of it's about reducing and reusing and repairing and recycling better. So this is where the new economy is going. And I think we want and will and should be good at it. I'm thinking some very specific areas. And I was just saying there about globalized economy. Well, one of the areas where we can go local is also in energy. There was a major report yesterday by EirGrid on how we develop our grid, shaping our electricity future was called. But one of the things they said is they heard back from their consultation, which was very extensive, is people want to be involved and they want to develop community energy. They want to develop their own power. They want to be part of it. That's just one example. I'm just thinking because it's fresh in my mind because they were presenting yesterday. But there's an example where we switch, we don't use power from distant, far away places. We rely on our own energy locally. And I think particularly then sharing it and benefiting from it locally is an example of where we're deglobalized, where we actually develop our own local resources. And I think there's loads of other examples. Well, the one I'd mention is, you know, this whole 15-minute city concept people are talking about. But it is the idea, it is the idea about strengthening the local, about having local services within reach, but creating a sense of community where I think this may help the high street come back. You know, small retailers, we can see it right across the country that it's become really difficult for a lot of bookshops or local smaller businesses. And I think this new circular economy that we have to plan, it is about that 15-minute city, about strengthening small local businesses. And that's another way it's local and strengthening local. And I think people want that. So I think your question is a very good one. I think it's happening in some ways because of some of the difficulties in global supply chains that come out of COVID. We should use this moment as a time to make the switch and dematerialize our use of goods, of materials as part of this circular economy. So I think that again is a good example. If we're looking at initiatives, I think asking for examples of that in this call, working with local authorities to create that, you know, someone mentioned that example there recently, you know, a lawnmower that's shared between neighbors is one less product having to ship across the world. It's one more kind of efficient use of materials here at home. There are loads of examples. And I hope this program, this funding, the 60 million euros might, as I said at the start, incentivize practical examples. And then when they work, catch on, spread them everywhere. That's how I think we should do it.
Great. Thank you, Helen. Callum, do you want to ask a question?
How do we break the glass ceiling, Minister Ryan?
Helen, do you mind if we move on? Sorry, just a couple further. Do you mind? I'll take them questions and we'll get the Minister to answer them again. Just we're running short on time. Thanks. Callum?
Thanks very much, Justina, and thanks, Minister, for taking the time to address these really important issues. I think it's so important that we hear directly from the public, and this consultation was a really interesting. My own name is Caleb. I'm from the beautiful county of Limerick. We met a couple of weeks back, and I'm involved with the PPN here at home, and I'm also involved with the Scouts. And I recently travelled over to COP26, and I travelled completely by public transport over and back. So it was a really interesting one, and I'd like to focus kind of my question around the transfer sphere from I suppose a rural perspective. And there's two main pillars I'd like to ask you around the individual and the collective aspect of transport. So in terms of the collective aspect, we are in serious need of proper infrastructure. And in terms of proper infrastructure, I mean delivering affordable, reliable and safe public transport across rural areas in Ireland. It's also very clear that a well-functioning and a societally supportive public transport system would have major beneficial impacts on our movement towards carbon neutrality and sustainable solutions and moving forward that front. And then quickly on the individual issue, we're seeing carbon taxes and higher petrol and diesel prices, and unfortunately limited resources in terms of supporting transition from fossil fuel driven cars to electric or hybrid vehicles, which is causing a major disparity for rural people who are trying to be more conscious in their actions and come together in that collective action towards a sustainable Ireland. So before I ask my question, I'd just like to put an emphasis on how important it is for you, Minister, to clearly define when these issues will be acted upon. Because as you know, being over in Glasgow, inside the Blue Zone, in the negotiation rooms and spaces as well, we're moving closer and closer to those worryingly high emission rates. And it's essential that we move forward and move closer to making decisive climate action like we have over the last while with the National Action Plan and the consultation. So my first question would be, how and more importantly, when can we expect to see a reformation of the public transport system in Limerick and rural counties across the country? And how, and again, more importantly, when can we expect to see reliable, accessible and affordable solutions to support the transition to electric-based vehicles, especially for rural communities? Thanks very much.
Thanks, Callum. You're right, we do need rural public transport as well as in our urban areas, and it is starting. We need to ramp it up and really expand it. 2 weeks ago, we launched a scheme, new program called Connecting Ireland. It was a new way of doing rural public transport, and it's open to consultation actually at the moment, and it's for every county. You can look up in the National Transport Authority, you'll see the link, and you can go in to look at the route options we're looking at across every county, rural counties, to see how do we create new, regular, reliable and affordable, as you say, public transport systems. We've tried and tested it. There were 2 examples. One was in the Dingle Peninsula, but there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. They're one of those areas where you maybe look at what's happening in Dingle and replicate it. There'll be a lot of good lessons. But around the end of the Dingle Peninsula, there used to be servicing 8 times a week, almost on the lunar cycle as to when the bus would come. You'd got very infrequent, and they changed that to 5 services a day, a loop around the end of the peninsula. And immediately the numbers took off. And even though obviously Dingle, you see a lot of tourists in the summer, through to now to the autumn and into the winter, it's kept up, local people using it, and it's working. Similarly, in Leitrim, back in April, we introduced a new example again, and that was using Local Link, which is another example of community local services. And what we're particularly interested in that was connecting some Local Link supports for health service transports, as well as local public service transport, kind of putting 2 or 3 things together, and in that, make it viable. And again, the same thing happened. Numbers shot up. Third one, I'm hoping to come out of this connecting, it's kind of, as well as the new routes we're looking at, I would like to see, and I think we are starting working, National Transportation Authority looking at it, at using new online apps. So we're looking particularly in rural Ireland, where could we use some of the things you're seeing in some other cities across Europe, the new applications where you can effectively, it is an hour or 2 ahead of traveling, and then say, this is where I'm looking to go. And the online system aggregates the various requests and the demand where people are going. And then you provide an on-demand service to meet that. But it works efficiently because you might have 4 or 5 or half a dozen or 10 people. So it makes the economics of it work. So that's already up and running. That's starting. Okay, it's maybe first Limerick and first Leitrim rather, and Kerry, but we're setting aside 5.5 million next year to go do more of that, and 57 million, I think, in the next 5 years. And it is all about being innovative around rural public transport, recognizing that go back to what I said at the very start. Like, this has to involve everyone, and every place matters. And it has to be public transport for rural Ireland as well as urban. And I think that Connecting Ireland scheme, if you look at it and look at the online details in every county where we're asking people, where do you think the route should go? I think that's a really good example.
Thanks very much, Minister.
Can I ask you a question, Callum? How did you find COP?
It was an interesting couple of days. I was over representing the lovely Scouts. So it was an interesting conversation. I suppose I got a lot of hope from our kind of collective goal of educating other people. But there was definitely a lot of frustration in terms of the accessibility of actually the decision-making tables and the negotiating spaces for young people. So I think in the coming COPs, we haven't delivered on everything. We know we still have a few days, and you still have a few days over there to deliver on everything. But definitely, I think in the coming COPs, it's important that we really make spaces for rural youth, marginalised youth, and young people in general in the negotiation spaces.
That's a fair criticism, I think. You saw the details there we heard earlier on. We are looking at a special dialogue involving young people. I had the pleasure of meeting some of the youth representatives who were here yesterday and also the National Youth Council of Ireland. And I said to them that they should really get involved in helping design that as well as delivering it. And I think, I don't know if we'll be able to change the arrangements here in Glasgow the next 3 days, but we can change things at home. And I commit to being as open and inclusive as we possibly can, particularly with our young people, in how those dialogues work.
Really appreciate that and look forward to seeing the actions over the coming few years in terms of that. So thanks very much. Thank
you. Sean, do you want to ask the Minister a question?
Yes, Justina, thanks very much. Good evening, Minister, and all the attendees. I'm a farmer and organic farmer, and I see soil as being a huge resource and asset to addressing climate change. But I also see, and I was pleased to hear Minister mention earlier about community development, but I see community as also being a huge resource. But I'm just wondering, is the government committed to linking the two? Linking the two through local organic food and sharing skills in community, and certainly a move away from lawns to more local organic food, and getting that organic food into the local schools, the hospitals, and so forth. So, Minister,
do you want me to ask you, Sean, where are you farming?
I'm farming in North Tipperary, Mr. Ryan.
I was out thinking a few years ago, and maybe I'm biased because you must know Contrast. Now he's more in South Tip, but he brought me along to something a few years ago, which was kind of a whole range of different Tipperary food producers, and you almost got the sense they were competing with West Cork, like as to who was the best at local food production. And there were a lot of them. Like there was I know the obvious ones like the Castle Blues or Con, but there were a lot. I was really amazed at. I think there's something happening out there, Sean. I mean, okay, yes, we need to increase the amount of land in organics. Yes, we need to get a better price for our primary producers, but there is things happening. There is a lot of people looking now for high quality food from local sources. A lot of our restaurants really emphasize that, and I think the Irish people want it. I think, go back to the question earlier on, how was about globalization. I think people increasingly, they do value and want to support local producers, and I think I thought Tipperary actually, what I saw that day a couple of years ago was actually that it is happening. It is starting on the ground. There are a load of, I mean, it's difficult. I know some of the community, farming systems, they're not easy to set up. I've seen friends involved in them, and it takes a lot of organization, takes a lot of work. But I think we are at a point where the public are looking for that, and I think that again can be an example within the fund, the sort of projects that we could. That's exactly the sort of thing we want to be supporting, in my mind, in terms of best case examples of how we make the connection between the consumer and the local farmer, and get over the. There is logistics and other hurdles to make it happen, but I think once you get it up and running at a certain scale, I think it could take off. So it's those sort of projects I would think again are really well suited for the sort of fund we're put in place.
Yeah, thank you, Eamon. But I think even for people that are outside of farming that want to get access to grow and produce into the local communities, I think access to land is actually quite an issue. Even though we have so much land, it is quite an issue. So hopefully that can be addressed, because I do know there's lots of people going to permaculture colleges and they want to do grow organic food for their community in harmony with nature, but getting access to land is a big issue for them.
No, you're right, and we need a whole new generation of young people to go into farming, and I think a lot of that is around supports of what sort of lease land systems we support. That we don't. I don't want to say anything about any one person, but we don't want to rural Ireland where the whole, it's a very small number of very large contractors managing a whole range of leased land, where we're moving away from our family farm structure. And I think where we have farms where there isn't someone inheriting or kind of taking on the farm, but they don't want to maybe give it up from the family, but to create lease arrangements where young people can get, they have to get some sort of security around, a period of time to be able to make that work. I think it's those sort of innovative leasing arrangements and supporting innovative leasing arrangements for young people to get access to land. Macron and the firm are very good on this. They're really conscious of that this is an issue, in my mind. And I think working with them and local groups, I think it is a huge issue.
I think so. I think Talamh Beo also champions the same cause, like, so let's hope we get some movement on that. Yeah. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Owen, do you want to come in and we'll finish up the panel of questions anyway?
I would. Thank you very much, and I'll keep my questions short because I'm conscious of the time. So, Minister Ryan, thank you for taking our questions. But you mentioned earlier about enhancing the natural world, and there was mentions, I think it was Colleen that said that biodiversity and climate change are interconnected. So what springs to mind there is rewilding, and I would just like to know, rewilding is very important and it's vital for the future, and government has a role to play in that. But I suppose on the individual sort of smaller scale, what incentives and what sort of, how will we incentivize people on a smaller scale to introduce rewilding?
We do need to rewild and bring back nature, because we've seen biodiversity crisis as well as a climate one. The fall in the loss of pristine water quality, loss of insect life, loss of bird, like our bird populations are in real trouble, and that erodes. So if you take every thread of fabric away, suddenly at certain points it really has hugely damaging effects. One idea that's out there at the moment, now this is around forestation, but how we define it may help us to be flexible in terms of the current, if you want to put into a forest, if it's, I think, if it's above 0.1 of a hectare, you have to get a forestry license, and that's complicated, takes time, it's expensive, less suited for farmers doing it for themselves or landowners doing it for themselves. And come back again to what I said earlier on, you end up with big contractors and and it's hard to, and you're giving up maybe all your land and giving it all to forestry is kind of, people are uncomfortable about that. So one of the things we're thinking of doing, we will be doing in the coming weeks, is change the law so that you can do a larger area on your farm and not have to necessarily have a license. Now we'll have to get it right, because we'll have to really, one of the ideas I had is even getting our advisors, Teagasc advisors, or others to help on this, to really look at each farm. I'm thinking about it's the farm basis now, in terms of doing this in clever different ways. In some locations, rewilding might be the exactly right thing to do, where you fence off and allow kind of forestry grow, and it's native, it comes up naturally seeded. It's very, Pádraig Fogarty is very good on this. I don't know if you ever read or heard him speak about it, that it's actually one of the easiest forms. But in other cases, we have to be careful, because we have to be conscious of other biodiversity issues, wetlands that we might want to keep. And it's that knowledge about the right native woodlands is another kind of where you can plant, but plant in a way that you get continuous cover, nature, more natural to forest growth. So I think there'll be a variety of different solutions. But first is to take away some of the excessive regulations we have. That one being a particular example, 0.1 of a hectare is the only area you can do, which is quite small and maybe sometimes stops the economics of it. And the Common Agricultural Policy that's coming through, it's not finalised yet, it'll have to be finalised in the next few weeks, has to support that. And in pockets, if you do, particularly if you support maybe two farms do it together, and if they were back to back in doing some of those pocket kind of forests, then you start to get areas that really do restore wildlife. In some instances, rewilded, in some instances, managed farms, and being kind of really clever at putting the right solution in the right place, the right tree in the right place is where we need to go. So that is, my colleague Pippa Hackett is going to, I think, introduce that legislation, and it'll take a period, because it takes a while to get a seed, and well, rewilding, you don't have to put seeds, but whether it's through rewilding or whether it's through seeded and planted trees, it takes time for that to grow. But that is the sort of, again, example of protecting the local environment and not necessarily stopping farming, bringing nature back to farms. And I think that's just one example of how we could do it.
Great. Thanks, Owen. So we're nearly coming to the end, and I think we've a few more minutes that before we need to wrap it up. But I'll just put a few questions, Minister, that came through the chat. To you. One here is around more information on the introduction of feed and tariffs for microgeneration, and that we need to stimulate household solar. And is there any more information that you have on that?
Very frustrating. We hope to have it this summer, and sometimes things take time, but we're going to have it New Year, first thing in the new year, the ability to sell power back. And then the next step, shortly after, is the ability for farms or small businesses or communities to come together and develop their own local power and get a price for it, slightly larger than maybe the microgeneration in the roof. Bigger, could be on a barn or a community building or a school, and then a third step, even slightly larger microgeneration again, probably come to the year afterwards. It'll take time to set up the regulations to give real support for that kind of larger local microgeneration. So again, this fund, or this example, it's one of the examples of practical schemes where communities might want to come together to invest in a local community energy project. That's the sort of project that might fit in within this new funding application system.
Great, and time for one more. I don't know, Minister, if you've seen the chat, but they're having great crack in the chat. There's loads of discussion going on there, and there's comments flying left and centre, and it's very engaging. So we will definitely get back to everybody on any questions that have come up there. But one topic that does seem to be getting a lot of attention there is around data centres. And I even saw one comment saying, how do you think this event is happening tonight if not for data centres? And there's kind of comments going to and fro, but just maybe you might share your view on data centres and where you see them in the future, or if it's a...
I keep answering this is to say, go back to what I said at the very start. Everyone's involved, every place matters. But also everyone has a responsibility and obligation. The data centers, which we do need, as you say, I'm going out through a data center now even as we speak, they need to fit in with the climate plan. And there is a very large increase in demand for electricity from data centers. We have to make sure that that doesn't trip us up in meeting our carbon targets. So we're talking to data centers and saying, can you be part of the solution? Can you be flexible in how your demand is used so that we don't push ourselves over what we can supply or what our carbon budget will allow? Can you be flexible in using backup power and generation that maybe helps us strengthen and support the grid so we have a more secure system? Can you locate, not necessarily where you might want to initially, but closer to where the power might be, so that, and that might be good for regional balance, regional development, so that we've less grid, we don't use as many pylons, and that we can use the power we have, very significant wind resources particularly, without shipping it right across the country. So there's some of the examples. I think it's not that we're going to say no to, but at the same time, it can't be a free-for-all. It has to fit in within the carbon budget. It has to be flexible to be part of this balancing variable supply, variable demand system. And I think the data centers increasingly know that, and they're going to have to play their part to work with our energy grid companies to make it work, and to make it work in a low carbon, zero carbon way. That's where we're going. Scale of change is beyond compare. Like it's no small task, but it's the right thing to do because for so many reasons, morally we have to do it, but also just maybe finishing words here from COP is this is the way the world is going. This is where the new economy is. This is the future prosperity for our country. We can and will be good at this. And we want it to be local, to be spread right across the country, to be sustainable, not only environmentally sustainable, but sustainable where our young people are able to raise a family, knowing that this economy is here to stay. And I think that's the key message I have coming out of COP, actually. This is the future way. This is the better economy. This is something that's going to be good for us as a country. We learn by doing. We learn by doing in this climate fund. We talk to each other and share best practice, which we do in the dialogue. And we listen to each other as to what works, how we can make it fit into a country that we're proud of, that it is a just transition and low carbon in everything, in every way.
Great. I think that's a really nice note to end the event on. And thank you, Minister, and thank you for being so open with the questionnaires and the people who we're here tonight, and so we might just leave it there. And what we will do is we will follow up with everything. There will be lots more dialogue, lots more conversations. It's ongoing. We're going to build on it. We're going to do more, and we will feed back to people at any of the important junctures. So just to thank everybody for their attendance and participation tonight, and we will talk again. All right. Thanks everybody. Take care.